And as I said, this course is on mindset, but it's sort of a philosophy and training course. We created it to help students ask and sometimes answer big questions. How do I make an impact on the world? How do I become better in relationships? Where do I find meaning and joy and gratitude? How do I change my internal narrative? And how do I train my mind to perform at an optimal level? And I think we have the perfect person to reflect on those big issues. Varun Soni serves as the Dean of Religious Life at USC and is the Vice Provost for Campus Wellness and Crisis Intervention, where he leads the advancement of wellness and provides training for faculty and staff on issues of student mental health. He's a chaplain, he's a teacher, he has hosted a radio show, he's produced a movie, and he is the person I and many others turn to when we have moral and ethical questions. He listens, he reflects, and he always delivers thoughtful counsel. As Dean of Religious Life, he brings together the spiritual and scholarly resources of the university, provides moral and ethical leadership for the USC community, and works closely with the 90 student religious organizations and the 40 religious directors on campus. As the university's chaplain, he has provided counsel and comfort to probably thousands of students over the years. If you think you are alone and you're the only one experiencing this, you aren't. We have Varun. Varun holds 5 degrees. 5 degrees. He has a bachelor in religion from Tufts with a minor in Asian studies, also completing a program in peace and justice studies. He has a master's in theology from Harvard Divinity School. He has a master's in religion from UCSB. Just because he had some spare time, he decided to be a lawyer and got a JD from UCLA. And he has a PhD in religious studies at the University of Cape Town. As an undergrad, and he's lived a really interesting life, and I hope that you share that with us. As an undergrad, he spent a semester living in a Buddhist monastery. He traveled the world for 18 months after graduating college. He brought the Dalai Lama to USC. I'm really glad you're here. For the first time in our series, please welcome Dean Varun Soni.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It was just like we rehearsed. I appreciate that. I want to meet that person. He sounds really interesting. I'm sure my wife wants to meet him too. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much. I wish I could have taken this class as an undergraduate. You've all done something right in a past life to be able to be here in this extraordinary class celebrating your 10-year anniversary. That's really amazing. I also know you've had incredible speakers in this class, and you must be really excited. Quincy Jones, Gloria Steinem, Will Ferrell, Norman Lear. These are people I've admired for many years. I know you have too. They've really transformed American culture positively and for the better. And yet, despite being the coolest college class in America, with the most inspiring guest speakers on the planet, somehow for the first day of class you got me, the religious guy on campus, whose greatest life accomplishment has really been convincing my wife to marry me. If you met her, you would see how that was an accomplishment. So I think I'm going to set the bar low tonight, but it will get better over the course of the semester. Please don't drop out, and if those of you who are trying to get in are lucky, maybe people will after today. So I'm also a little sick, so I apologize for being a little depleted. Can you hear me in the back? If it's not amplified, I can speak louder. Okay, I'll speak a little louder too. So your professor told me, thank you, that's great. This class is really about mindset. And so I thought I'd offer a few reflections on mindset, the relationship between mindset and meaning and purpose in terms of my journey and my college experience, which you heard a little bit about. And hopefully some of my thoughts, my experiences might be helpful to you as you wrestle with similar issues in your life. So I grew up Hindu in the United States at a time when there weren't a lot of Hindus in the public sphere. When I was growing up, we had Deepak Chopra and we had Apu from The Simpsons, and that was about it. Those were our role models. I've gotten to know Deepak pretty well, and so I always thank him for being that inspiration in my life. Otherwise, I would probably end up at a convenience store. I struggled to understand what it meant to be Hindu when I was growing up. I struggled to understand what it meant to be Indian, what it meant to be an immigrant, what it meant to be a religious minority, what it meant to be an ethnic minority in the United States. And many of you might have had similar experiences. And I also went to Catholic school growing up, and I was taught that idolatry is a sin. And then I would go home and I would see gods and goddesses everywhere in my house. So it was confusing, I think, growing up at the time when I did, when we were the first generation of Hindus to be born and raised in the United States after the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act. Basically, most Asians were barred from immigrating to the United States between 1925 and 1965. And so this wave after the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act of Asian immigrants changed the landscape of the United States, and my parents were really the first of that wave to come. When I was in college, like you, I decided to take an Asian religions course, partly because I wanted to fulfill a GE requirement, and that's ironically why most of my students take my class, but mostly because I wanted to learn more about my own ancestry, my own culture, my own religion, my own tradition, my own history. In many ways, I was a heritage student, and there was something I think somewhat ironic about that here I was learning about my Eastern religious tradition at a Western research university. I see many students at USC doing the same, studying a region, studying a religion or a tradition to learn more about their own ancestry or where their family is from, etc. The class that I took on Asian religions changed my life, and I know you've probably taken classes that have done the same for you. I think this class will. And it inspired me, as Professor Blasco said, to go live in a Buddhist monastery in India for a semester. I was 20 years old. It was my junior year abroad. And the monastery that I lived in was in a town called Bodh Gaya, which is the town where the Buddha was enlightened. It was considered, and still is considered, to be the center of the Buddhist universe. When I was living in this monastery, I took the vows of a Theravada monk. I studied Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist meditation and Buddhist culture. I would meditate under the tree where the Buddha was enlightened in the evening. It was a pretty incredible experience for a 20-year-old kid who grew up in Newport Beach. I never had any experience like that. And I became enamored with the life of the Buddha, the life story of the Buddha. For those of you who know, the Buddha was born a prince. He was supposed to be this great king, this great conqueror. His father tried to protect him from the suffering of the world so he would be a great king, a great conqueror, to fulfill his caste obligation. But when he saw suffering in the world, he left the palace, and he vowed that he would never return back to the palace until he conquered suffering, until he figured suffering out. At that time, I was leaving the comfort of my parents' home, going off to college. I had set off on my own spiritual journey to India to understand my own true nature. And I think the Buddha's life story, the story of leaving the protective walls of home and going out in the world to discover himself, is all of your stories too. In many ways, you're on that journey as well, and that journey is a lifelong journey of self-discovery. When the Buddha achieved enlightenment, when he sat under that tree, when it all became clear to him, he articulated the Four Noble Truths, which, for those of you who know about Buddhism, you know that's the foundational doctrine of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. And for me, at the time when I was living in the monastery, I really thought a lot about the First Noble Truth. Does anyone know what the Buddha's First Noble Truth is? Anyone? The First Noble Truth. Life is suffering. Life is suffering. Now, I struggled with this because I thought, that's not true. Life isn't suffering. Life is beautiful. Life is transcendent. I just sort of fallen in love, and I was, walking on air. Life is possibility. Life is adventure. But as I got older, I began to realize Buddha's truth isn't that all life is suffering. That's not what he was saying. But what he is saying is that to live is to suffer. To live is to suffer. One thing that connects us all as human beings, no matter where we live, no matter when we've lived, is that we will suffer. You will suffer. You have suffered. That is a fundamental truth. And another thing that connects us all as human beings is that we want to be free from suffering. So we all suffer, but none of us really want to suffer. And that's essentially what it means to be human. What the Buddha taught was that there are two types of suffering. There's material suffering and there's mental suffering. Material suffering is the suffering of the world. Material suffering is the suffering of not having enough to eat, not having shelter, not having community, right? Not having some kind of security in your life. It in some ways corresponds pretty well with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that in order to achieve self-actualization, you have to achieve other things first. You have to have security and shelter and food. Then you can start thinking about the big questions in your life. Okay. But the type of suffering that I was concerned with at the time was mental suffering. And for Buddha, that mental suffering happens in here. So there's the suffering of the world, the external world, and then there's the suffering of your own mind, the internal suffering. And what Buddha taught and what I found out in my own experiences is that I can't always control that world, and neither can you. You can't always control what happens out there. You can't make people do what you want them to do all the time. You might not always get the job that you want. You might not always get the grade that you want. You might not get the internship. That's part of a normal college experience, but it still causes suffering. You might not be able to move the pieces of your life around in the way that you want them to. You might not be able to get the girl or guy to like you back. That was the story of my college career. You can't always change the world out there. It feels disempowering, like you don't have agency because you can't change the world out there. But where do we have power? Where do we have agency? It's in the way we perceive that world. It's in our reaction to that world. We might not be able to control it, but we can control how we react to it. We can control how we interpret it. We can control how we engage with it. And that's where power lies. That's where we have agency. And that's the power of mindset. And so for the Buddha, your suffering and your way out of suffering is all about mindset. We suffer because of the way we see the world. And we no longer have to suffer if we see the world in a different way. That's why many people think of Buddhism as a self-empowering tradition. It's not a theistic tradition. It doesn't involve God. We are the cause of our suffering, and we are the solution to that suffering. We are the way out. We are the way in, and we are the way out. For Buddha, the reason we suffer is because we see the world in a way that it doesn't exist. We see the world as permanent, and we see phenomenon as independent. Okay? When in fact the world is impermanent and everything is connected. We see ourselves as permanent, right? When we think of ourselves, who are we? Who are we? Who are you? Who's the 5-year-old, who's the 15-year-old, and who's the 20-year-old? What connects the dots in your life? I'll throw it out there. There's no real right answer there. But who are you? I mean, that's a pretty deep question, but who are you when you think of yourself? Who is the me? Who is the I? Anyone? Who are you? This is the question Buddha asks us. Who are you? I think most of us think of ourselves, even if we're not conscientious about it, as the same person over time. We may grow, we may evolve, but there's something that connects the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old. There's some thread, perhaps. But when we try to grasp at it, we can't find that thread. The fact of the matter, there's almost nothing about you today that's the same as the 5-year-old you, the 10-year-old you. Nothing biologically, nothing on a molecular level, nothing energetically, emotionally, spiritually. You are a completely different person. And it can be exhausting to constantly be defending a self that's permanent. It can be exhausting. And so what the Buddha said is, actually, you don't exist. You don't exist. You are impermanent. You might exist in this moment in a particular way, but in the next moment, you're going to exist in a different way. And if you accept the fact that you are impermanent, that you change, that you evolve, that you grow over time, you no longer have to deal with the afflictive emotions that attach themselves to a permanent self. I can spend my whole life defending the diamond in that closet. That's my diamond. That diamond is awesome. How dare you talk smack about my diamond? Get away from my diamond. This is the best diamond ever. My whole life I can spend defending that diamond. But when I open the closet and there's no diamond, that's liberating. I no longer have to defend that which doesn't exist. So for the Buddha, if we don't exist, then who's going to suffer? If you don't exist, then who's suffering? That's the question he poses to us. And so I began to really think deeply about this. How do I think about myself, my own suffering, the idea that I'm stuck in this paradox where the only thing permanent is impermanent. It is impermanence. The only thing permanent is impermanence. The only thing constant is change. That's the paradox of life. That's what we all wrestle with. The only thing constant is change. There's a Buddhist saying that you can't dip your foot in the river twice, right? And it's, when I first heard that, you can't dip your foot in the river twice, I was like, oh, of course, because I thought I was so smart. Oh, of course, yeah, you can't dip your foot in the river twice because the river's flowing. And the river you dip your toe into the first time is different than the river you dip your toe into the second time. That river isn't the same. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's not just that the river is different. It's that you are different. You can't dip your foot in the river twice because the you that dips your foot in the river the second time is a different you. That's a pretty it's a pretty difficult idea to wrap one's head around, I think, when you are raised in the United States. Because essentially what a Buddhist philosophical tradition sort of tells us to do is to be involved in the process, that the process is the goal, that the process is the goal. We tend to live our lives in the United States between goals, this goal, that goal, next goal. All right, I got to great high school, great college, marriage, career, and somehow in between those goals, your life happens. Okay? And if you're only looking at the next goal, if you're only looking at the next step, you're missing the life that actually happens in between those goals. So for Buddhists, the goal is really the process. The way you live your life is the goal, not necessarily the milestones that you achieve, but the way you get to those milestones. That's the goal. All right? That's the goal. That's process-oriented as opposed to goal-oriented. And that also highlights this really, I think, fundamental notion in Buddhism that all time happens in the present moment. All you have in your life is this moment. When the past was here, it was the present. When the future is here, it'll be the present. The only time you ever exist is the present moment. We can say two things about you that are fundamentally true, and that's about it. That you were born and you will die. Okay, that's true. And that every moment of your life will happen in the present moment. Every moment of any person's life who has ever lived happened in the present moment. That's it. That connects you with anyone who's ever lived. You've all been in the present moment at every moment in your life. So if we're not looking at the present moment, if we're not engaging the present moment, if we're not living and breathing in the present moment, then what are we doing in life, right? And that's why the Buddhist emphasis on meditation is really an emphasis on the present moment, because that's where we live. That's where we exist, right? So as I went through this experience in the monastery, I began to realize I can't control everything, but I can control some things. What can I control? What can you control? Well, there are things you can control that seem trite, but the more you study the science of gratitude, the science of happiness, the more you encounter the ideas that you're going to encounter in this class, the more you'll realize that the things that you can control are actually the most important things in your life, not the least important. What can you control today? You can control your beliefs, your attitude, your thoughts, your perspectives, your values. You can control how honest you are, who your friends are, what books you read, how often you exercise, what you eat, how you interpret situations, how many risks you take, how kind are you. You can control how grateful you are, how much effort you exert, how much time you spend worrying, how you judge or don't judge others. You can control how many times you say, I love you. Those are the things you can control. You shouldn't ever let anyone or anything take that control away from you. You might not be able to control your salary, your status, your celebrity, okay? Those are the things that American capitalism tells us are important. Those are the things that the research university tells us are important. Those are not the things that our spiritual and wisdom traditions tell us are important. And increasingly, those are not the things the science of gratitude, happiness, and peak performance tell us are important. So if we follow the wisdom and we follow the data, we come to the idea that the things you can control are actually the most important things in your life. Now, this is a very spiritual way to look at it. I can be touchy-feely. I'm the Dean of Religious Life, so I have that latitude. But it's not just a spiritual idea. There is a corollary now in psychology, and I encourage you all to read a book called Mindset, appropriately. It's a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist out of Stanford. I think the book is on your bibliography. And she talks about two kinds of mindsets that might be an interesting or helpful way to frame this conversation for you. The first kind of mindset that she talks about is a fixed mindset. And she juxtaposes that to the second kind, which she calls a growth mindset. What do you think a fixed mindset is? Yes?
I think the fixed mindset focuses on the resources that you think that you have and you feel like you're limited to those resources.
That's great. That's right. The fixed mindset imagines that our fundamental qualities, like our intelligence, our character, our skills, are fixed traits. We're born with them. That we are born with these talents, and those talents that we are born with are ultimately responsible for our success. Not our effort, but our intrinsic sort of our inherent kind of gifts, our talents, our nature. we should document, we should celebrate, we should reward these inherent talents. That's the idea with the fixed mindset. You're smart, so let's celebrate it. Let's make sure everyone knows it. Let's reward that, right? With a fixed mindset, you either have it or you don't have it. You either know it or you don't know it. You're either successful or you're not successful. There's a lot of binaries in the fixed mindset. What about a growth mindset in contrast? What might a growth mindset be? Yeah.
Failure and challenge is opportunity.
That's right. In the growth mindset, we believe that our learning, our intelligence, our skills, our talents, our character, our virtue, all these things can evolve over time. They grow over time. That achievement is not a function of inherent intelligence, but rather the result of effort and hard work. With a growth mindset, it's not about what you're born with. It's about what you do with your life. It's about where you go. It's about how you get there. What the data tells us now is that people who have a growth mindset are much more likely to be professionally and personally successful, much more likely to flourish and thrive in their lives. So what does this mean for you? So I believe that college is the right time in your life, the right age in your life. The ages of 18 to 26 are the richest times in your life to start to shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And that being at USC gives you this opportunity and privilege to do so. The reality is, in this society, to get into a college like USC, you have to have a fixed mindset. That's the way we've been conditioned. That's the pathway in. When you're in high school, it's all about grades and scores. It's all about knowing the right answers, being externally validated by others. It's all about being intelligent. You prove it over and over and over again. You jump from hoop to hoop to hoop, from test to test to test, in order to prove to the world that you belong at an elite academic university like USC. Your whole life, people have told you you're smart, you're talented, you're special, and you've had to carry the burden of proving that to yourself and to others over and over and over again. And quite frankly, that can be exhausting. But now that you are in college, you have jumped through all those hoops. You've got the prize of admission, and you are now part of the 1%, the 1% of people in the world who will graduate with a degree from an elite research university. So now you can finally begin, I think, to cultivate a different consciousness. You've achieved what you've needed to achieve to be able to finally, I think, embrace a growth mindset, which focuses on learning as opposed to knowing. Not knowing the answers, but learning about the field. That focuses on effort as opposed to intelligence. That focuses on internal validation as opposed to external validation. That there are inner resources that you have. There's self-love, self-compassion that you have. That you're not constantly dependent upon the accolades of others. And I think most importantly, a growth mindset focuses on asking the right questions as opposed to having the right answers. It's the questions that you have to live with and interrogate. In college, you have the chance now to grow, to experiment, to hypothesize, and to test in a life laboratory these skills and ideas in your own life. Here at USC, we talk a lot about cutting-edge research science, which is predicated on scientific method. You hypothesize, you test. Either it works or it doesn't. You falsify, you conclude. But why are we only testing science in that way? Your life can be a laboratory where you test your own ideas out, your own skills, your own relationships, your own virtue. You can test, hypothesize, falsify, conclude, etc. And this is the time to do it. When I teach, I always tell students, I don't want you to worry about the grade. Forget the grade, and I think therefore I'm kind of an easy A. I have that reputation. But it's not that I want to be an easy A. It's that I don't want students to get so obsessed with the grade that they're not learning anything. I would much rather give everyone an A and say, forget the grade. Now let's get into the material. Let's get passionate about the life of the mind. Let's delve deep into these issues that impact the world and impact you. The grade can be a distraction. That's external. That's fixed. I want growth. I want to explore. I want to delve deep, right? My friend Pico Iyer, who's a great author, he has some wonderful TED Talks out there. He just wrote a book called The Art of Stillness. He was telling me about his home in Santa Barbara, which burned down. And I can relate because my home in Santa Barbara burned down too. But unlike him, I'd already moved out. He was living in it. This was his his family home. All of his stuff from his whole life was there. And he said that when his home burned down, he was in sort of a shelter with all sorts of other people whose homes also burned down, neighbors that they'd known for a long time. The whole neighborhood was gone. And what he noticed what he noticed was that for some people, they would never recover. That house was their identity. That home was who they were. When they lost that home, they lost themselves. They would never recover. And for other people, they had a lightness about them. They saw a different future for themselves. They suddenly began to see, hey, I didn't really need anything in that house. And I'm free from the burden of defining myself from that house. I'm free for the adventure that lays ahead. He said, this people in the same family, maybe brothers and sisters, could have different reactions to the same event. You know? The people who were devastated and couldn't get over the fire had a fixed mindset. They fixed their identity in a particular way that didn't allow them to grow. And the people who didn't had a growth mindset. And they were the ones who had the resiliency to recover and to make an opportunity out of a crisis. You will have crises in your life. They will not end. They don't end on our campus. They don't end in our country. They will not end in your life. You cannot necessarily mitigate the crises in your life or predict them. But you can develop a resiliency, a mindset that allows you to translate those crises into something meaningful and important to you. And those are the kinds of skills I know you're going to get in this class. And I'm really happy that we're able to have that kind of conversation. And to me, the growth mindset is also reflective of a Buddhist mindset. It is a process-driven mindset as opposed to a goal. It is focusing on the present as opposed to the future or the past. So I want to give you 3 tips on ways that you might be able to cultivate a growth mindset while you are here at USC. My first is to ask the big questions in your life. Ask the big questions. Ask yourself the questions that make you human. Who am I? What is my purpose? What matters to me? Why does it matter to me? How do I live my dreams? How do I translate my values into actions? How do I find significance and a sense of belonging? These are the questions that connect you to everyone who's ever lived, because what it means to be human is to wrestle with these questions. For me, religion is often about answers. People go to religion for answers, but spirituality is often about questions. 2/3 of you would describe yourselves as more spiritual than religious in this room, if the data, is predictive. And so if that is the case, then your spiritual life is really about asking yourself these big questions, even if you don't know the answers, because those answers change. The answer of who am I and what does my life mean will change from year to year, but the questions remain. The questions are important. It's important to live those questions, to breathe those questions. When I was an undergraduate student, my academic mentor told me his story about the big questions in his life. He wanted to be an astronaut, and back then you could actually be an astronaut. I don't know if you can anymore. It was a different time. And so the way you became an astronaut was you would go to the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and you would train as an Air Force pilot, and then you'd work your way through the space program. So he went to the Air Force Academy, and he trained, and he was a senior at the Air Force Academy. He was getting ready to go out and explore the cosmos. He wanted to go where no one had ever gone before. He was super excited about it. And then he read a book by a French existentialist philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre. And when he read this book, he had this realization that as an astronaut, he could go to the far corners of the universe, but he could never leave his own mind. He could never leave his own mind. And so he concluded that the most important journey for him to take was not to outer space, but to inner space, into the infinite depths of his own mind, his own heart, his own soul. And so instead of becoming an astronaut, he became a Buddhist philosopher, and that's how I met him. He spent his life right here on Earth. He never went into outer space, but he still sees himself on this lifelong mission to explore the universe. It's not the universe outside of him, though. It's the universe inside of him. And he found out that that was also a place where no one had ever gone before, right? We can all go on a lifelong journey through inner space if we ask ourselves the big questions in our life, the questions of meaning and purpose, the questions of significance and authenticity, the questions that break us open and make us whole again. And by doing so, we create the conditions for personal growth and transformation and ultimately success, however we define that. My second point for mindset, growth mindset, is to embrace failure. It sounds cliche, but embrace failure. All of you are here this evening because you have succeeded at a very high rate. You've been successful students, you've been successful leaders, artists, and athletes. You continue to fulfill the traditional metrics of success. You are amongst the most successful students in the country, 12% acceptance rate. We had 70,000 students last year apply for 2,800 spots. And at the end of the day, you're all sitting in this room. You're all able to be here and even have this conversation because you've been successful. That's ironic. You're able to hear me talk about how you need to embrace failure only because you've been successful. And yet, over time, you will come to find that you learn more from failure than success. That's where evolution happens. That's where growth happens. That's how you plant the seeds of success. It's important to know what doesn't work if you want to find out what does work. It's important to know what you don't want to do if you want to discover what you do want to do. The world may label that as a failure, but that's a necessary precondition to success. Any basketball fans out there? Anyone? Clippers fans? Any Clippers fans? There's never any Clippers fans in this town. So I'm a hardcore Clippers fan, die hard, 30 years, like before any of you were born. I was rooting for Keith Kloss. I was there when Larry Brown was coach. Like, I grew up in Boston rooting for the Celtics against the Lakers during the Bird Magic heyday. So when we moved to Southern California, I couldn't be a Lakers fan. So I became a Clippers fan. I've been hardcore for a long time. And I've learned a lot about failure as a Clippers fan. They weren't always Lob City. That was actually the anomaly. And so I'm used to failure. But I also grew up in the Jordan era. And my brother, who was like a bandwagon fan, he loved Jordan because Jordan was a winner. And he had this poster that I loved, a Michael Jordan poster that you've probably seen on his door. And the poster said, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and I've missed. I failed over and over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." I love that. I love that idea. It reflects what Thomas Jefferson's story was too. Thomas Edison. Edison built thousands of prototypes for light bulbs that didn't work before he invented one that did. Looking back upon his journey to build the first light bulb, he said, "I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work." What is Edison, what is Jordan telling us? They're telling us to fail forward, to fail into success. People generally fail and succeed at the same rate, but those who succeed more only do so because they've failed more. You may try 10 times and fail 5. Someone else may try 100 times and succeed 50. You may succeed 5, they may succeed 50. They may look more successful, but they've also failed 10 times more than you have. They haven't just succeeded 10 times more than you have. And anyone you admire who has succeeded spectacularly has failed spectacularly. Spectacularly. The greater the success, the bigger the failure at some point. This, to me, is your time to fail. This is your time to take risks. This is your time to enjoy the fact that you have a safety net now to experiment with. This is your time to be bold. You can throw 10 things to the wall. Maybe 1 or 2 stick. That's fine. You can shoot for the sky. You might hit the roof, but you can shoot for the sky. If you shoot for the roof, you might not get off the ground. This is your time to be bold. Most of you don't have responsibilities to anyone but yourself right now. That's a rarity in your life. It's never happened before and it won't happen again. When you were younger, you lived for your parents, you lived for your teachers. At some point, you'll live for your employers, you'll live for your family, you'll support your spouse, your kids. At some point, you'll support your parents, your partners, etc. When do you get to live for yourself? When do you get to live for yourself? Now. Now's the time. And it goes by fast. You won't ever be in a situation like this again when you're just responsible for yourself and your dreams. So now's the time to fail and to fail big and to wear it as a badge of pride and to really redefine it in some ways as success. And my third point in terms of a growth mindset is relationships. Over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of new research focused on the science of happiness that you'll encounter over the course of the semester. Much of the research points to the idea that happiness or well-being is a choice. It's not a condition. You choose happiness or you don't. It's not something that you are or you're not. It's something that you choose or don't choose. My favorite research study on this topic is the Grant study. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's the longest longitudinal study of human development in history. The study began in 1938 with the goal of following over 200 Harvard undergraduates over 75 years of their life to determine what are the factors that lead to human happiness, what are the factors that lead to success and a sense of flourishing. They followed all men because in 1938, Harvard only accepted men, unlike SC. We were inclusive from the very beginning. We had women in our class 100 years before Harvard did, but that's neither here nor there, just something you should be proud of. So they studied these men for 75 years, and what did they find? They spent a lot of money. They spent over $20 million. They spent a lot of time, over 75 years. They studied everything. They measured height and weight. They measured salary, relationships, level of education. Every metric known to the social sciences and humanities, they covered over this longitudinal study. And ultimately, they discovered that what the most important thing is for your success, for your sense of flourishing, it's not salary, celebrity, status, or career. It's not your grades. It's not your degree. It's the depth of your loving relationships. How strong and deep are your loving relationships? Or, as the lead researcher said in summarizing the findings, the 75 years and $20 million spent on the grant study points to a straightforward 5-word conclusion: happiness is love, full stop. It's what the Beatles told us 50 years ago. All you need is love. What does the grant study mean for us here today? I think it means that we all have to work on our relationships as much as we work at our jobs. We have to work on our personal lives as much as we work on our professional lives. We have to cultivate emotional intelligence as much as we focus on developing intellectual skills. We have to focus on our heart, not just on our mind. We have to celebrate our friendships, prioritize our family relationships, and make the proactive choice to be happy, to flourish. We can choose happiness by choosing love, by choosing relationships, by choosing gratitude. Those are the relationships that you have developed at USC and will continue to develop. The relationships of friends and colleagues and mentors, the relationships of the Trojan family that make it one of the most diverse communities ever. When you leave USC, you will most likely forget the things that you learned in class, but you will never forget the people you met here. Your future partners, your future spouses, your best friends, your collaborators, your peers. They will be with you throughout the rest of your life. This is the Marshall School, so I should say that this idea of the importance of relationship is even apparent in the way we spend our money. There's a 20-year study out of Cornell University that just came out. And the idea is, the goal of the study was to figure out how can we spend money in a way that gives us the most fulfillment, that gives us the most pleasure, that gives us a sense of accomplishment, that makes us feel good. How do we spend money in a way that makes us feel good? And basically what the study said is that you don't spend your money on things. You should spend your money on experiences. Not on things, but experiences. Why? Because things are solitary, but experiences are shared, right? Back in the day, I know no one would do this anymore, but I could buy a CD. I could go home and listen to it. Or I could go to a concert with a bunch of friends and see the same band. That experience of sharing the concert with my friends will transform me in a way that owning a CD over time won't ever do. Things are functional. You buy things to get things done, but experiences shape who we are fundamentally. Experience like going to a concert could be a life-changing experience. Buying a CD, probably not. Things are comparative, right? You can have worse things or better things, and there's a law of diminishing returns. You will never love a car as much as you love your first car. Your first car is probably the cheapest car you'll ever buy, the most run-down, the least impressive. You will never love a car more than that. You will love each subsequent car less, even though each car will probably be a better car, quote unquote. So things are comparative. There's always something better, there's always something worse. But experiences are singular. How do you judge a dance? You can doubt a creed, but how do you doubt a dance? You just have that experience, right? Things exist over time, but experiences are fleeting. So you value it more because it doesn't exist over time, because it marks a particular moment in time, because it's impermanent. So when you spend your money on experiences, you're making memories by developing relationships with others, by being in communities with others. Georgia O'Keeffe, who was a famous American modernist painter, she said, "Nobody sees a flower, really. It's so small. We haven't time, and to see takes time. Like to have a friend takes time." Do we have time anymore to make friends? Do we have time in the age of social media where we have 1,000 friends online to have 3 or 4 real friends offline? That's what I want for you. I want you to have the time to make the friend. For those of you who are graduating, the most important advice I can give you, this is your last semester here, is spend time with the people you love. Spend time with the people you love. Let them know how you feel. Don't take it for granted that you'll always have that opportunity. I see the same thing on graduation day every year. It's the most bittersweet day of the year. In the morning, people are super stoked, they're excited, they've been looking forward for 4 years to graduate, they're amped. If they're Marshall students, they're probably a little drunk. They're really, really, really happy, right, on that morning. They're just blissed out. But by the afternoon, suddenly they're pretty sad. Because as they're seeing their friends go, they're like, wait, I'm leaving you, and I might not see you for a while. And wait, this wasn't so bad, 4 years of freedom of thought and movement. And you think it's actually, it looks much better when you start your first job. You're like, wait, what was I in such a hurry to get out of school for? That's why I never left school. I'm still here. So spend time with the people you care about. Let them know that you care about them, right? Let them know. Don't wait until the last minute. I'm like the only Indian uncle who will ever tell you to not prioritize your studies this semester. Prioritize your social life. Prioritize what happens outside the classroom. Because at the end of the day, the things you will remember and the most transformative moments of your time at USC as an undergraduate will happen outside the classroom. They happened in the dorms. They happened in athletics. They happened in study abroad. They happened in the band. They happened in Greek life. They happened in community service. They happened in undergraduate student government. They happened on the Daily Trojan. That's where we transform ourselves, within a university context, but outside the classroom, in relationship with the people we care about. The reason why I want you to have a sense of urgency about your relationships is because every year, the hardest thing I do is oversee student death. We have 47,000 students now. We will lose a number of students every year, between 6 and 12. And there's nothing more tragic than a parent bearing a child. It seems so unnatural. It should be the other way. We should be burying our parents and not vice versa. When I became a father a few years ago, overseeing memorial services became much more personal for me. I used to be stoic. I used to be strong. I could be comforting to parents. I can't do that anymore. I cry with parents now. I pray. I mourn. I go home feeling guilty that I can go home to my little girl, but they can't. You shouldn't take these relationships for granted because none of us are guaranteed a tomorrow. And that means you shouldn't live with regrets. There is a really powerful book that was written by a woman named Bronnie Ware. She was a palliative care nurse. That means she spent time with patients at the end of their life. For 15 years, she was doing hospice care. She was, in many cases, the last person people saw before they died. And they would confide in her things that they might not feel comfortable confiding in others at a time in their life when they were the most vulnerable. And what she realized is that over these 15 years, people basically said the same 5 things in terms of their regrets. People on their deathbed have the same 5 regrets. And she wrote a book called Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, appropriately, talking about those 5 regrets. My hope for you is that you don't have these regrets. You don't have to wait to the end of your life. You can start thinking about this now so you don't have these regrets. Just assume that you will because you're human. And these seem to be universal human regrets. The first one is, I wish I had the courage to live life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard at my job. I wish I had the courage. By the way, no one on their deathbed says, I wish I worked more. No one. No one says, I wish I got that promotion. I wish I got that salary. No one. That's not what's happening when you have absolute clarity over your own life, when you're reflecting upon your life. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I'd let myself be happier. There we go. Happiness is a choice. I wish I'd let myself be happier. Not I wish I was happier. I wish I'd let myself be happier. I have the power, and I didn't allow that to happen. I had the power to stay in touch with my friends, and I didn't allow it to happen. I had the power to express my feelings, to work less, to live the life I wanted to. And that's why there's the regret, because there was the power. I'm going to close by offering a challenge to all of you. At USC, especially those of you who are graduating now, you're probably in the process of compiling a resume, a stellar resume, a document that the world will see that will get you the job or that will get you the internship or will get you the graduate school admission. And this document will highlight all of your extraordinary athletic and academic and leadership and artistic accomplishments. This resume will represent a version of yourself that you will put out into the professional world. And this resume is very much, I think, a product of a fixed mindset that you will list your accomplishment, your degrees, your experiences to prove your intrinsic worth to others, to sell yourself to others. But at the same time, you have to do that, but at the same time, as you build this external resume, I want you to think of as a parallel process about another document that only you see. We'll call it an internal resume that measures and celebrates your bravery, your courage, your failure, your relationships, your purpose, your growth, all the things that make you personally as opposed to professionally successful, the things that mean something to you. And to me, that internal resume will be reflective of your growth mindset. Whereas your external resume will be the document through which the world judges you, your internal resume is an opportunity for you to assess your life and your life goals. It's an opportunity for you to develop your own metrics of success, not to jump through those metrics that are defined by others. And what you'll find is when you develop a strong internal resume, your external resume will flourish too. So when you focus on your personal success as a human being, you'll also thrive professionally in the career of your choice. And ultimately, I think this internal resume will help you develop, cultivate, and embrace a growth mindset in your life. A few years ago, undergraduate student government put out this idea of a course that is actually very similar to the course you're already taking, but is based very much on popular courses at Yale, at Harvard, at Stanford. Stanford has a class called Design Your Life. Yale has a class called The Art of Happiness. Harvard has a class called Positive Psychology. These three classes are the most popular classes in the history of these institutions. In the 350-year history of Harvard, the most popular class is Positive Psychology. And at Yale, the art of the science of happiness. So we began to think about what a USC version of this class could be. Could it be something that we offered all first-year students? And we're piloting it this year and this semester, so I'm going to shamelessly plug this and leave it. If you are interested in thinking deeply about emotional intelligence, lifestyle redesign, meaning and purpose, there's a nutrition and sleep, diversity and equity, spirituality. These are all the topics that we cover in the class. Check out this class. It's a pilot class. It's a lot of fun. It's called Thrive, and I'm going to leave it right here. It's really for undergraduates, but graduate students can take it as well. And that being said, I'll just wrap it up, and I think we'll go to the conversation now. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start with one question, and I really want you guys to ask questions. There's so much there, and I hope, as a 20-year-old, I don't know if I could have accepted what you just said, because I was so driven to get out of my circumstances, get out of my town, come to USC, saw how the other people live and how great it could be, and I was just so driven, to get the grades to get into a good law school or whatever it is that you want to do next. And someone said something in this class a while ago, and it sort of hit me, because whose version and opinion of themselves is tied to achievement, right? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, that's human. And this person, a psychologist, said, well, if your self-esteem is tied to achievement, the odds are very long that you'll be happy. And I was just like, how is that possible? We're sort of programmed, and I don't mean just people in this room and type A's and people at elite universities, but I think as a human, we're driven to become better, to be successful, and to have at least a side helping of accomplishment, to look yourself in the mirror every day. But when someone said, if your self-esteem is tied to achievement, chances are you're not going to be happy. And so to hear you say, I think, are we designed to be happy? And I know happiness is not the term that you prefer. You prefer joy or flourishing, right?
Eudaimonia, yeah.
Yeah. Are we designed to be happy as humans?
So I actually don't like the term happiness. To me, happiness comes and goes. Happiness is often something that you're happy because something happens in the world, and if something else happens in the world, you're unhappy. So it's too fleeting. I don't think it should be the goal. I like the idea of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is a Greek word. It means to flourish or to thrive. Maybe joy could be a better, another way to describe it. That accepts the idea of suffering. That accepts the idea of challenge. You can't be happy if you're suffering, but you can thrive. You can flourish, right? In fact, suffering can help you thrive and flourish. So I think happiness to me is a trap. To me, happiness is a trap. I don't think we're designed to be happy because phenomenon arise and cease. The world is impermanent. And so if our happiness is based upon the external phenomenon of the world, there's no way we can always be happy. And then again, you won't really be happy if you've never been sad, right? So you have to have a full experience of life to even appreciate what happiness might be in its fleeting moments. I think what I would like all of you to focus on is something that comes from within you, that is generated from inside, that endures over time, a sense of eudaimonia, a sense of joy, a sense of resiliency or equanimity, where you're not too high and not too low. To me, that is the goal. And I don't know if we're designed for that, but I think we can achieve that with the right mindset, with the right attitude, with the right practice, etc.
And all these things you talk about, we say mindset, it really is a skill set that you must practice. I think anybody, play an instrument, anyone play a sport. So, who the people you see at the elite level that you really admire, they enjoy the practice almost as much or more than the game. And Kobe was here in the fall, in the spring, and sort of said that, I'm a beginning piano player. I love it more than anything, but I typically practice the same things that I already know. Yeah. Those 3, 4, 5 songs that sound good, and I'm not going into like the real uncomfortable stuff. Yeah. And so I think if you can learn to enjoy the parts that really you're not good at yet, that's why we talk about all these cliches, getting outside your comfort zone. Like that is where the growth is. Yeah. And so don't be a lazy practice player. Really enjoy that part, and that's part of the course. Does anyone have a question for Varun?
Can I just say one more thing about what you said? So this whole idea of achievement, I get it. The reason I have 5 degrees is because I have 12 physicians in my family, and my PhD means nothing to any of them. So I constantly felt like I was undereducated, and even my physician wife calls me Mister. I'm like, it took me longer to get my PhD than it took her to get her MD. But so I grew up in that environment where nothing was ever good enough. So I get it. I get this sense that you have to prove yourself, you have to achieve, that your parents made a lot of sacrifices so you could be at elite university, so you could get to the law school or the med school so that you could live your dreams, etc. And what I'm saying is that I'm not saying don't put in the effort. I'm not saying don't achieve. I'm not saying don't live your dreams. But to do so in a way that focuses on the process and not just the goal. And one of the most powerful spiritual pieces of wisdom that I've encountered in my study of comparative religion comes from my own tradition, Hinduism, a holy text called the Bhagavad Gita, probably the most important Hindu text. And the gist of it is maximum effort, minimum attachment. Maximum effort, minimum attachment. That achievement is in the effort. Achievement is in the courage. Achievement is in showing up. Whatever the outcome is often beyond your control. So why get so attached emotionally to that outcome? And maybe there's another outcome that happens that's actually much better for you. Maybe you want to go to school X and you go to school Y and you're like, wow, school Y was the right school for me. I just had to be open to what, I'll be a little touchy-feely because I'm the Dean of Religious Life, I have to be a little open to what the universe is trying to show me or trying to offer me, right? So hard work is not negotiable if you want to achieve anything. That's the one thing you're going to find that connects the dots with every person who speaks to you today. They all have worked extremely, extremely hard. There is no path to success without hard work. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But that can you find the joy and the excitement and the passion in the work itself, not just in the reward of that work. If you are oriented around the work, that's where your passion will increase. I think when you get to college, people say, find your passion. I don't know if we find our passion. I don't know if our passion is just floating out there and somehow we connect to it. I think we create our passion. We create our passion by being good at something, and we're good at something by putting in the effort. We create the passion by putting in the effort. If you love something, you'll be good at it. And if you're good at it, you're going to make money doing it. But if you go into it trying to make money and reverse engineer it, it might not work as well. So the idea that passion follows effort and excellence follows effort, I think is the right idea. The reward will come if the passion is there, and that passion will follow your effort. I don't think it just exists without that effort.
It doesn't. There's ways to discover that. We'll talk about, Ken Robinson, a very famous TED Talk on finding creativity. It discovers you sometimes, and sometimes you discover it. So if you find yourself at 4 a.m. in your dorm, researching something or writing a paper or a startup, and you haven't eaten in 2 days, chances are you're doing something that you really enjoy and that you're going to be good at. Because the only competitive advantage in life, unless you really are, gifted, and those are rare things. Again, fixed mindset is the amount of work that you'll put in. And we've had other people, Brene Brown. You have to audit yourself occasionally. And am I being a perfectionist? Am I being too much, or am I a healthy striver? Because being a perfectionist is, we'll probably all raise our hands to that one. That's a very fixed mindset as well. And so when Varun mentions fixed versus growth, we're all in our mind going, oh, I'm growth. I'm definitely growth, But it's not all or nothing, right?
Yeah,
there are parts
right.
of your life in which you are fixed.
Yep.
There are parts in your life that you are exceptionally growth oriented. You're fixed, so you ever have this experience? You see someone do something exceptionally well. Someone is a great public speaker. And you think, how could I ever be that good as that person? That person's gifted. Well, he or she's practiced for years and knows his or her stuff very well. And so it's just sort of incumbent upon you to put in that time and that effort. So there are parts of your life that will be fixed and then parts that will be growth. So don't think you're all or nothing. Who's got a question for Varun? I'm going to turn my mic off because they conflict here.
Okay. Oh, this one.
Are we on? Okay. First of all, thank you so much for coming in. That was amazing. My name is Brandon. So I grew up in a community that I would consider pretty joyous and happy, different than most. I mean, oftentimes we'll kind of sit together and talk about how do you share that happiness. So a term we'll often use is how do you kind of cut and paste what we have, our community, and bring it to other people. So just curious on your thoughts about that.
How do you? What did you? What are they? You said you often think about this or talk about. What did you come up with, or your community?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of all I knew growing up. From when I was about 15 to when I graduated. I'm from Miami, so it's pretty far to come here. But I often just recognize that just being happy and just being yourself and just being positive around people tends to make them positive in the moment. But I kind of have struggles with how do you permanently impact someone's life. I don't even know if that's possible,
Yeah.
but just
It's a good question.
how do you kind of
So
share
what
that?
you found, actually the data shows, if you have a happy friend, you're 20% more likely to be happy yourself. If your happy friend has a happy friend, you're additionally 10% more likely to be happy on top of that. That we have a force multiplying effect, that in some ways we're candles that can light the flame of other candles around us just by our presence, by our joy, by our gratitude. So it is important to hang out with people who you respect and admire. There's a saying that I thought was kind of silly when I was younger, and now I think it's so true. Show me your 5 best friends and I'll show you who you are or who you will be. That the people around us impact us significantly. They impact us the most. So I think what you have come up with in terms of being a flame or a light or a source of joy for others is exactly right. How do you do it permanently? You do it every moment of your life, and that's how you do it permanently. Your life is just a series of moments. You are always in the present moment. We want to find happiness in life. If we're happy in the present moment, over those moments, that becomes our life. There was a book that is pretty famous called Life is Elsewhere by Milan Kundera. The idea is that life's not now. Life is when I grow up, when I graduate, when I get married. Life isn't now. Life is elsewhere. But life is now. Life is not elsewhere. And if you want to be peaceful, joyful, grateful, mindful in your life, then you have to be peaceful, joyful, mindful, grateful in each moment of your life. And collectively, those moments of your life make up your life. So I think the moment is enough. Thinking about how it's going to play out in 10 years. The reality is the future is never the way you plan or expect it anyway. I live 1,000 futures in my own life, but only one in reality. And that reality is never the same as the 1,000 futures I've lived in my own life. But the present moment that I'm living, while I'm dreaming about the future and neglecting the present, that present moment is actually my life.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I also want to thank you so much for coming in and speaking. That was amazing to listen to at this age, especially. I just want to know your definition of success.
Success.
And if you have any successful people that you model or look up to.
That's great. Thank you for that. these days when I think of success, I think of personal success. For me, I want to be successful as a friend. I want to be successful as a parent. I want to be successful as a husband, a mentor, a professor. I don't think of success as I want to achieve this recognition or buy that thing. That wasn't always the case, but that's sort of where I'm at in my life. And I think it's because the person who I admire the most and who I think is successful is the Dalai Lama. I was lucky. I got to meet the Dalai Lama when I was 20. I was meditating one morning under the tree of the Buddha's enlightenment, and I was having this kind of crazy mystical experience, and I hear this laughter, and I see the Dalai Lama walking towards me. And I'm like, I must be tripping, like full on hallucinating, maybe I'm levitating, but it was actually him. And he just happened to be in town, and he was swinging by, and he led me in meditation under the tree of the Buddha's enlightenment as the sun was rising on Mahatma Gandhi's birthday as a 20-year-old. So it blew my mind, obviously. And what was really cool is when we brought him to SC, I was able to arrange a lunch with him and my students here. So I met him in college, and then I got to introduce my college students to him 20 years later, which was really beautiful. I should have retired after that. I had the Dalai Lama, and then we hosted Beyonce's mother last year, and Beyonce tweeted us out, and I was like, well, after the Beyonce tweet and the Dalai Lama, I'm done. Like, it's all downhill from here. But for me, the Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness. It sounds cute, but it's really deep. My religion is kindness, and that's the way I want to operate. Compassionately, compassion to me is not a noun, but a verb. What does it mean to be compassionate in your life? What does it mean to act in that way? That to me is success. Kindness is success. Compassion is success. Gratitude, love, laughter. That to me is success.
Hi, my name is Peter. I also want to thank you for coming. My question is, your title is Dean of Religious Studies. So how does religion play into the growth mindset, and what's the difference between spirituality and religion? Yeah,
you tell me, what's the difference between spirituality and religion? I don't think there's a right answer, but how would you define that? That's a great question.
I feel like religion is a lifestyle and how you live your life, and spirituality is a mindset.
I like that.
In my opinion.
That's
in a way,
great.
how you function and how you train your mind to think.
I've been asking students for 10 years, what's the difference between religion and spirituality? I hadn't heard that answer, and I like that one. Some students tell me that religion is about answers and spirituality is about questions. A computer scientist told me that religion is closed source and spirituality is open source. Deepak Chopra told me, and I like this, that religion is someone else's experiences, spirituality is your own experience. Religion is the experience of the priests and the prophets and the messiahs and the rabbis in our traditions. Spirituality is your experience of the world, right? I think that's one of the reasons why your generation is not very religious, actually. This generation is 45% of our first-year students are not affiliated with religion. In 1950, that was 2% of Americans. In the United States, that's 20% of Americans, but for college students, it's 45%. So in just 2 or 3 generations, we've gone from people who are not affiliated being a very small minority to soon being the majority. So that's the big story in American religion today, that the rise of the not affiliated. Those who are not affiliated are the fastest growing religious demographic in the country. It's not Christians, it's not Muslims, it's those who do not affiliate with religion. But that doesn't mean when people walk away from religion, they walk away from meaning or purpose or significance or even God. Just because you're not affiliated doesn't mean you're an atheist. It just means that you've lost faith in the formal structures of religion. And many young people have lost faith in those structures because of the evils that they've seen religion perpetuate, from terrorism to child abuse to xenophobia to anti-LGBTQ rhetoric to misogyny, etc. So now that's half the story of religion. Religion is also, there's another story of social justice and hospitals and schools and all that. But I think for this generation, if it bleeds, it leads. And if it bleeds in the name of God, it gets the front page. And most of the stuff we read about religion is negative. So for me, spirituality is your personal journey, your personal quest, the way you answer the questions in your life. I don't think all of us are religious, but I think all of us are spiritual because we're all wrestling with those questions. And I think fundamentally that's who we are. There's this great quote by a French philosopher, Desjardins, a theologian. He says, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." think fundamentally we are spiritual at our core. That's what defines us. And that's what I want all of you to celebrate. I'm less concerned whether you're religious or not, but I want you to be fully engaged in the questions of meaning and purpose and significance and authenticity. And I'll put it a different way, which isn't as poetic. I also run the threat assessment team here at USC. I'm the chaplain with a SWAT team. It's crazy, but it's true. Somehow or another, that's the way it played out. Not what I anticipated. I walk into a room now and there's the FBI, the LAPD, and the SWAT, and I'm waiting for the meeting to start, and I'm wait, I'm the one running this meeting. Never thought I'd be in that situation. But what we find when people become threatening to others, when they become violent, when they're on a pathway to violence, is they've lost protective factors in their life. And many of those protective factors are factors like meaning and purpose and a forward orientation. If you don't have something to look forward to in your life, you're more likely to not flourish. In fact, you're more likely to self-destruct, quite frankly. So when we think about people in our university community and how we move them away from a pathway of violence towards a pathway of flourishing, we try to rebuild those protective factors in their life. Make sure they have the right relationships. Make sure they're in the right degree program. Make sure they have the right mental health support, spiritual support, etc. So it's not just that meaning and purpose is something that, it's not a luxury, I think, for us. It's fundamental to who we are. And when we don't have meaning and purpose in our life, when we don't have relationships, when we don't have something to look forward to, we do self-destruct.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you again. I have a feeling this is going to be a long-winded question, but I'll probably get there. Earlier in your talk, you basically referenced the idea that there's something about American society that's making the foundation that we're growing up in is making kind of the Buddhist perspective or more spiritual perspectives a little intangible or more abstract than maybe other parts in the world. So I'm kind of wondering, and you referenced that you're a father, I'm wondering if there are some ways we can reposition the messages that we're teaching kids, that we're sending to kids, or some new messages that you think we should be reminding ourselves and our younger siblings and our younger generations.
That's a great question. I struggle with this question. I'd love if someone could help, if others have thought about it, maybe they could help me think through it. I do think it's true. American capitalism is predicated on the accumulation of capital. And almost every one of our religious and spiritual traditions teach us that that's not really the point of life. In fact, for Christians, if you look at the teachings of Christ, that's actually antithetical to a spiritual process. Jesus gave up everything. He was a renunciate. He was an ascetic. He wandered through the desert. He hung out with people who were marginalized and dispossessed, the so-called criminal element, etc. He did not worship money or power, etc. Neither did Buddha, and you could go through all the spiritual exemplars. So I think there is something about just saying that the accumulation of capital will give you the kind of meaning and purpose and joy in your life that you seek. When people, I find, achieve those things, they feel like they've been sold a raw bill of goods, that they don't necessarily find that that's the case. What we know is that money doesn't make you a better or happier person. It amplifies who you are. If you're miserable before, you're more miserable. If you're ecstatic before, you're more ecstatic. That's more a function of mindset and who you are than it is of money, etc. And we also know that people who win the lottery a year later are kind of in the same emotional state that they were a year before. And people who become paralyzed a year later are also at the same emotional state that they were a year before. So something that's terrible or something that is wonderful, you equalize emotionally based on who you actually are fundamentally. In terms of conveying this to kids, I think our challenge at USC and our opportunity is you are all, in some ways, you're all guinea pigs. This generation is a generation of guinea pigs because for thousands of years, humans have communicated with tongues, and now we're communicating with thumbs, right? And you're the first generation to be entirely born and raised in an online social environment where many of your meaningful experiences and relationships have happened online. And I think because of that, students struggle offline. What I've seen over the last 5 years at USC is a very different set of issues that students bring to me. And fundamentally, if I can try and get to the sort of the core of it, is I believe we have a spiritual crisis of loneliness. I see students who are really, really lonely. They feel like they're the only lonely people, that everyone else has figured it out but them, that everyone else deserves to be here but them, that everyone else is flourishing but them, that everyone else has a plan but them. And throughout my day, dozens of students will tell me this. So it's obvious that actually most people feel this way, but people feel alone in that. I had a student come up to me and said, in this, the new University Village dining hall, the one that we say was modeled after Harry Potter. I'm like, can we say it was modeled after Oxford? We're a university, not a movie set. But he said, can we have a table in the dining hall where people talk to each other? I was like, isn't that the whole dining hall? Isn't that what the dining hall is for? They're like, no. He's like, no, come to the dining hall and you'll see people sitting by themselves looking at their phones. No one has permission to talk to each other. We need to create a table which is tech-free where students are facilitating conversations. I'm like, that used to be such an organic thing. Now it has to be a production. It's probably an important thing to do because of this idea of loneliness. And I think social media, for all of its benefits, amplifies and exacerbates this loneliness. When you look online, you are looking at a curated version of someone's best life and comparing it to the real version of your worst life. Of course you feel terrible after that, So I think what I would communicate and try to communicate to younger generations are the limits of social media and the importance of having offline experiences and relationships and the primacy of those relationships, that in fact those are the more important relationships in your life. And you don't need 500 friends online. You need 5 friends in life. You need 5 friends who have your back. That's really what you need. And I don't know what to do. It's not like suddenly we're going to be offline. It's not like social media hasn't had all these incredible benefits. It obviously has. But this is a new challenge that's playing out in real time, and you're the first generation that's really gone through that. In thousands of years of human histories, you're the first generation that are fundamentally communicating in different ways.
Hi, my name is Victoria. Thank you again. My question is more so advice. So not everyone can succeed in what they want in the way they'd hoped. It's easy to say, like, fall 9 times, get up 10,
Yeah.
but then when it's been 7 years of your life and maybe the universe is telling you whatever your dream was, you're not going to be the Rudy of that story.
Yeah.
And so what would your advice be to someone who maybe they were mindful and they did enjoy the process and they did work really hard, but they're either not good enough or they can't control if they're going to make it at that level in that career, whatever it is? What would your advice be to those people?
So my advice would be based on a word that you said, and that word is story. For about 100 years now, we've had a debate about nature versus nurture. Are you the product of your genes or are you the product of your environment? Of course, the biologists say you are the product of your genes. You are the product of nature. The sort of sociologists would say you are the product of your environment, your nurture. I think most of us think that it's probably a combination. You're kind of the product of your genes and you're kind of the product of your environment. Nature and nurture are both in play, but neither is, in my opinion, a satisfactory answer because neither of those conditions, nature or nurture, are conditions we choose. You don't choose where you were born and you don't choose how you were raised. So if nature and nurture is responsible for your own personal identity formation, what role do you have in your own personal identity formation? What agency do you have? The third word I like to talk about, which I think is the more important of the 3, is narrative. You don't control nature and you don't control nurture, but you do control narrative. You control the story that you tell yourself about who you are. When I said, who are you? You're not the same person at 5, at 10, at 15, at 20. That's all true. But what connects you across your life is the story that you tell yourself about who you are. You are constantly telling yourself a story about who you are. There is a voice in your head that's dictating the story. And maybe that story says, you can't do this because that's not who you are. You can do that because that's who you are. But that story is a story of your own creation. Steve Jobs, in his famous commencement address at Stanford in 2005, said, look in the mirror. If you don't like what you see, change it. I think what he was saying is, if you don't like the story that you hear in your own head, rewrite that story. And that's, I think, where it starts. The patron saint of Los Angeles, Walt Disney, he said, if you can dream it, you can do it. And I think most people feel like they can't do it because maybe they haven't dreamt it. So if it is true that you've tried to do something in a particular way and it hasn't worked out in the way that you want and you're thinking about what's next, revisit the story that you've told yourself about who you are. What is that story? And why is that a fixed story? Can that story grow? If that story can grow, then recite and rewrite that story. Tell a different story about who you are. Tell the story first before you go out in the world. Imagine it first before you go out in the world. And that's mindset. That's mindset. Narrative is mindset. Get into that mindset that empowers you to do the things that you want to do and that interprets the world in a way that sees it as a blessing and not a burden. You could see everything that goes wrong in your life as a burden, but you could also see it as a blessing. You could see the house burning down as a burden. You could also see it as a blessing. What I have found out is as you see yourself, you see the world. If you see your life as a place of hope, if you see your life as a source of hope and possibility, you will see the world in the same way, and vice versa. If you see your life as a burden where every door is closed to you, you won't see hope in the world too. Those things are connected, the way you see yourself and the way you see the world. So I would say revisit the story. Fundamentally, be aware of that voice in your head. That voice is not some random voice. That voice is not some objective voice. That voice is your voice. It's been constructed over time. If you're not proactively telling your story, then you are just the recipient of some random story that's being told anyway. If you're telling that story, you might as well own it. And so revisit the story that you're telling and think about what story you want to tell. That's the place to start.
Thank you again. My name's Graham, and sorry for taking the last question. But you talked both about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, and also this concept of too often we chase the future and we lose sight of the present.
Yeah.
And so I'm obviously in the moment hearing someone talk about that. It seems very clear to us now, or at least to me. But I think that as we live our life and in practice, it's often easier to lose that clarity. So I'm curious to see in your daily life, what are simple things that you do, that you put in practice, that help you keep that clarity? Yeah, that's it.
Can I show you?
Sure.
Okay. So everyone, I want everyone just to close their eyes for a second. I want you to take a deep breath through your nose. In and out of your nose. I want you to be right here in this room at this moment. I want you to feel yourself in your chair and feel your lungs fill with air and slowly exhale. And at this moment, there's no judging. There's no right. There's no wrong. There's no you. There's no me. There's just this moment. There's just this breath. Think of your mind as the sky and your thoughts as clouds. Your clouds, the clouds pass by the sky. They're not part of the sky. Just let the thoughts go. Just let them go. No judging, no clinging. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. They come and go. Right now you are your breath. You are the present moment. Slowly, I want you to open your eyes, gently come back to the room, come back to the class, still be in the present moment. And it's as simple as that. 30 seconds of silence, and yet that was the most profound part of my day. And it was probably the only part of my day where I was fully connected to the present moment. It's not possible in our life to only live in the present moment. We have to plan for the future. We're students, we've got careers, etc. But can you carve out some time? Can you carve out some moments to come back to the present when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling confused? To let it go, to realize you're not your thoughts and your emotions. We tend to think we are our thoughts and our emotions. If I feel that way, that's who I am. But your thoughts and emotions come and go, but there's something that endures beyond that. And so whenever you're feeling like you need to just reconnect, just close your eyes and take a few breaths and come back to the present moment. It's always there for you. Okay.
Passion, whether you take on the world, It really is simple to slow down. Because it's taken me so long, not because of you, but like it's so rare to have you here, and it really is something that I appreciate, and I feel like I learn so much from you every time. And
Thank
I'm
you.
inspired
Thanks for
by
being
it.
here.
And I'm really glad you're at USC.
Oh, thank you. I am too. Thank you.
I want you to think of a couple things, not long stories, but a quote or a powerful lesson that you're going to take away and remember 5 years from now. Even though we're in the present, maybe it's something that's going to last for a while. So I want to see hands of people who remember something from Varun's talk. Who's ready? Hands up. Ready? Speak loudly. Go.
It's not about finding your passion, but finding your
Relationships. Fail into success. Maximum effort, minimum attachment.
failing is learning. Spirituality is how you answer the big questions. Fail forward.
Last question.
The only thing constant is change.
You're not your thoughts and your emotions.
Live in the present. Growth mindset.
Speak up.
Happiness is not something you are or are not, it is something you choose.
We're not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
How you see yourself, how you see the world.
We create our passion.
How kind are you?
No regrets.
Fail forward.
Say it again.
Fail forward.
Every moment in your life is lived in the present.
You're a different person now than you ever were.
It's about the process. You control your own narrative.
Prevent crises that can make your voice your neighbors.
Personal over external success.
Let's thank Dean Varun Soni.